All right, we are in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 today. Last week, we made it all the way to verse 12. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12. But we're in a section. I want to look at this section. I'm not going to read every verse in this. I'm going to look at this section. And this section really begins in chapter 9. But I'm just going to read chapter 9, verse 27. But I discipline my body and bring it into subjection. Paul's writing this, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified. What is he saying? He's saying that he can be an apostle of Christ. He can be a faithful preacher, preach the whole counsel of God, preach it all, and yet become disqualified. How is that? Well, if he's not disciplining himself, one can be a hypocrite. Preach it one way and live it another. Have a double life of you present one thing to the outside world or to certain people of the outside world, and you're another thing altogether in a different environment. But he says that he himself should, or I myself, should become disqualified. Then in chapter 10, going down really to chapter 12, we have the events of the wilderness wanderings of Israel having been taken from out of Egypt, and they're on their way to the land of Canaan, the land that had been promised to the children of Abraham, and they would receive that. But here, this is an example that has been given for us. It's recorded for us to learn, and that is something we need to understand. There are principles that remain true all the way through time. Principles that remain true. Principles of obedience to God. And Paul, actually it's the Holy Spirit, is putting these things in this letter for a reason. This is being said for a reason. Verse 6, now these things became our examples to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. What did they do? Well, they were all freed out of Egypt, every single one of them. They all went through the Red Sea. They all were led by God through the wilderness. They all drank the same spiritual drink, same spiritual food, and yet some of them angered God greatly, and their bodies were scattered in the wilderness, which is precisely what Paul writes in verse 5. But with most of them God was not well pleased, for their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. Verse 6 again. Now these things became our examples to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. Which means that yes, could they be freed by God, freed out of Egypt and being taken to the land of promise? Yes. Could they fail still in this? Even though the land has been promised to them, could they fail God? Yes. Could they die at the will of God, be put to death as punishment in the wilderness, having never stepped foot into Canaan? The answer is yes to all of that. Yes. One could think that he would have at least taken them and just if he did not care. Let's just rephrase this. If he did not care how they behaved, if he didn't care about that at all, of any obedience whatsoever, well, then he would have just sent them on right into Canaan, and they could just be as idolatrous as they wanted, murmuring as much as they wanted, complaining against God as much as they wanted. They could do all of those things, sin as much as they wanted, and they would receive the land of Canaan. But that's not the case. God was concerned about their obedience. He wanted them to be obedient, to be faithful to Him. Now, has that principle changed? We can be saved from our sin and have the promise of heaven, but we can still fail God and fail ourselves. Once saved, always saved is not found in the Bible anywhere. It's very much like that of the sinner's prayer, or that challenge, and it is a challenge. No one has met the challenge yet. And the challenge is, find me the sinner's prayer in the Bible, please. Show me the sinner's prayer. Because I will guarantee you what is presented as the sinner's prayer, the popular one, isn't found anywhere. Not in wording, not in principle, not in concept. It's not there. Okay? Once saved, always saved is not there. Why would the Holy Spirit bother with sending the church in Corinth this letter to correct them? If it's once saved, always saved, what does it matter? If it's once saved, they can behave however it is they want to behave. Why send them this letter correcting them? Why do it? And why bring up this? 1 Corinthians 10, verse 6, now these things became our examples to the intent that we should not lust after evil things, as they also lusted. And then we come down to verse 12, therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. Might I suggest that someone who believes once saved, always saved, is in this category of thinks he's saved when he's not saved. He thinks he's saved. He's confident he's saved. He believes, or she believes, she's saved. But just because you feel it, believe it, think it, doesn't mean it's true. It doesn't mean that at all. There's a way that seems right to a man, but the end thereof is the way of death. It can feel right, seem right, majority think it's right, but it's not right. Let God tell us what's right. And here, chapter 10, verse 12, again, therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. Well, what did Paul just say in 9, verse 27? But I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified. Is he saying he can fall away? Yes. This is a thing of self-confidence. Verse 12 is a thing, therefore let him who thinks he stands. He's confident that he can stand on his own 2 feet, that he can remain in a saved condition because he's mature enough, strong enough, he's got it. You still need God's help. Satan's still around. Satan will still find the weakness. Satan's not ignorant of such things. And he also knows that he can play on someone's or take advantage of someone's arrogance. And take care, he can use someone's weakness of pride, someone's weakness of self-confidence, someone's weakness that they just know that they know that they know that they know, and he can play off of that and use it against them. That someone can have just convinced themselves they are the pillar of the faith, and they're not. They're not. Look at Paul's humility in all this and forthrightness in it. I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified. He's saying that he always had to discipline himself. Always had to discipline himself. Can we consider ourselves better than Paul? I doubt it. I seriously doubt it. And I think it would be harmful for us to think of ourselves better than anyone. It'd be extremely harmful to do. That we are just as susceptible to the schemes of Satan as anybody else. Just as susceptible. And Satan will look for a way. If we have the whole armor of God, which you can only get that from the New Testament. You can only get that from Christ. If we have the whole armor of God, Look at, do you think that Paul, who writes about it, is saying that he has to discipline himself? He's got to discipline himself. Keep himself in check, because we can all have moments of weakness. Moments of weakness brought about numerous ways. Numerous ways. Points of grief. Points of great disappointment. Points of great happiness and elation. Points where things just seem dull. Satan can use any occasion to get his weakness that he needs from us. Now we go to verse 13. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. No temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. What does that mean? That means you're going to be tempted. But it's not a one-way street. You're not set on a conveyor belt to sin, and you have no way to remove yourself. God does not put us in a situation like that, of where we're put in a position where we have to sin. Never. There's always a way of escape. There's always a way of escape. Let's go to the book of Daniel, and we'll see this in action. And just know that sometimes there is, by saying no to sin, could be the threat of death. So, it's the threat of death. Saying no to sin could mean losing job, losing friends, losing family, losing your life. And the response to that is, so? Satan can use anybody in your life and use anything in your life to put you at a point when you're going to kill your conscience. Put you at a point where you're going to sin and sin and sin and sin. And day by day it gets easier, and soon it seems normal and right. It gets to that point, and Satan does his job, his self-appointed job, well. But we come to Daniel chapter 4, and we see where in this chapter Nebuchadnezzar has set up an image, and the image is to be worshipped by law. It is to be worshipped, and everyone is to be getting together. You've got all these people coming together, and there is going to be the sound of all this music. There's a little orchestra. The Babylonian symphony is there, and when they play, everyone is to bow down and worship this image. And we see, verse 12, there are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you, for they do not serve your God or worship the gold image which you have set up. They didn't do it. Now there was the threat of death. What was the death? It's a furnace. Anyone not willing to worship this gold image, and this would have been an impressive thing. It's tall. It is it's a tall, thin thing, and we see that it's made out of gold. But this would have been an impressive thing, especially if you know that it's gold. That would be an expensive thing. And everyone is supposed to worship this. Everyone. Now, you worship it or you get thrown into the furnace. Worship it or die a very horrible way. One or the other. Did God give them a way of escape? They can still say no. Die in the furnace? They might. Yeah. Now, as it turns out, God's going to spare them from it. But it is, I love verse 16. Daniel chapter 4, verse 16. This is where these three men are speaking. Daniel 3:16. I don't know what I said. Did I get the right book? I don't know. Daniel 3:16. That Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. It should be obvious to you. There's no need for us to think about it, is what it comes down to. There's no need for us to think about it. We don't have to contemplate this for very long. He gives them another opportunity. The next opportunity. This is a do-over. We're going to have the symphony strike up again. We're going to have this band of instruments. They're going to do their thing. And then you're going to bow down to this. And they say, we have no need to speak about this. We don't need to talk about this. We have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and He will deliver us from your hand, O King. Now notice, they have a confidence that He will. But then in verse 18, but if not, let it be known to you, O King, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. Okay, here they're saying, we've already made this decision. We made this decision years ago before you even made that thing. We made this decision. Just like those coming to church today should have made that decision years ago that every Sunday this is where they're going to be. They're going to be at church. It's the same principle. And not worshiping the things of this world and not getting enamored and taken by all the distractions this world has to offer to get our mind and our hearts onto something else. But they say God can deliver us, but even if He doesn't, it's still okay. It's okay. We're not going to serve this thing. We're not going to, we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. We're not going to do it. Now, did God give them a way of escape? Yes. Was it a way that was without threat from wickedness, of wicked men going to do wicked things? No, the threat was still there. It was still there. It didn't get rid of that threat. They are just acting on faith. They're acting on faith and faithfulness that, no, we're not worshiping this because that would be the wrong thing to do. And we've mentioned this principle before. It's better to die righteous today, having made the right decision, having put yourself clearly in the camp of, in God's camp. Clearly there, to die in God's camp, than to sin so that you can survive the day. It's better to die with God than to continue upon this earth and live by way of sin. They have a way of escape. And the way of escape you can think of as pretty harsh. Now, here we are looking at this, thousands of years after the fact, and that we are not involved in this. We're not the ones that are going to be tossed into the fire. And so we can see, yes, clearly that's the decision that they should have made. Clearly that is. But we can find ourselves in similar situations and know that it can be a hard decision to make if we make it that way. It can be an emotional decision. It can be a decision, and I have seen people that it's churning in their mind. This is what they're supposed to do. This is what they're doing. This is what they've been doing. And they know what they're supposed to do. They just they're looking at counting the cost, and all the things they're seeing are worldly. They're not looking at eternity. They're not looking at eternity at all. You know, if you can have everything that you ever wanted in this world, you're only going to have it for a short period of time. Whether it's and you're never assured of the next minute. You don't know how long you got it. So this world is not very secure in anything. Not very secure in anything. And here we come back to 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. No temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man. So whatever you or I may go through, that's a common thing. That's a common thing. That, you know, we could go through people's lives, and we can see common mistakes. Just things that you see all over the place and have been going through time. Things that there's nothing unusual. There's nothing unique. Nothing. There is no new sin that has entered the world. There's just another technology that may make it to where you can kill more people faster, steal more money quicker. There is that, but it's still murder and theft. That's what it is. It's just a different, you could say it's an industrial level of it, but and you're doing it faster and you're doing it at a greater scale. But it's still the same thing. It's still murder and theft. So there's not a single thing that comes down the line that someone else hasn't already faced. And someone like Paul hasn't already faced. And the first century Christians haven't already faced. And Stephen, who was martyred, hasn't already faced. That they have faced it and they went through it. And for someone like Stephen, who God didn't spare his life, Stephen is stoned to death. Now, the Nadab, not Nadab, but Abihu, not them at all, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they are spared. Stephen's not. But even with Stephen, even there, what does he have? God on the other side. That's what he's got. He gets to leave this earth and enter into paradise. That's what he's got. And his trials and everything are over. Now let's continue with this verse. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. There will always be the way to escape. There's always the ability to say no. There's always that ability. You can always say no to whatever it is. You can do it. And I remember years ago, there was a particular preacher talking to me, and it was a woman who she had been needing various things, and there were certain things that she was needing that the church simply could not do. Couldn't do it. And she tells the preacher, well, you've just made me go into prostitution. And the fellow said, no, I didn't. That's your choice. No, I didn't. You don't have to be a prostitute. There are lots of things you can do. Nope. There's, you think that this is going to make him, she thinks it's going to make him feel guilty, and she may honestly feel that's what's happening, but no one was making her do anything except herself. No one was making, and he most certainly wasn't, simply because the church was not capable of helping her to that kind of a degree. Couldn't do it. And you're going to, I got to be a prostitute now. No, you don't. You don't have to do that at all. You can do something else. And just look at the population How many women are actually prostitutes compared to how many others never have been? Okay. Kind of tells you that you don't have to be that. And there is always a way of escape. Always. Now, beginning in verse 14, we're going to go, he's continuing on a discussion that was in chapter 8. He's continuing a discussion, and he will be coming back to this principle. And that has to do with eating things that have been sacrificed to idols. It's not a problem we have, but this is here for an example. This is here for us to take note that by principle, this still is something. It's still something. You can do something that causes somebody else to stumble, even yourself. But you can do something that can cause someone else to stumble. And this is a message that goes out. Therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. I speak to you, I speak as to wise men. Judge for yourself what I say. So that's verse 15. Now verse 16. The cup of blessing which we bless, is it not the communion of the blood of Christ? The bread which we break, is it not the communion of the body of Christ? All right, so he's bringing in the Lord's Supper and a way of making comparisons. He's bringing the Lord's Supper, and that we are in the body of believers, the body of Christ. We are in that body. It is that body of believers. For we, though many, are one bread and one body, for we all partake of that one bread. There's one bread, and there's one hope, and there's one Lord, and there is one fellowship, there's one faith, there's one body. It is that one body of believers and one faith that they follow. And verse 18, observe Israel after the flesh. Are not those who eat of the sacrifices partakers of the altar? Are they not fellowshipping with each other, fellowshippers of the altar, you might say? Are they not partakers of the altar? Yeah, well, who was part of that? Well, that was all one. You have that of the priests involved in that, and it was absolutely legitimate. Does that mean that they are in fellowship with each other and with God? Yes, they are. Yes, they are. What am I saying then? He's going back to idolatry now. That an idol is anything, or what is altered to idols, what is offered to idols is anything? And the answer to that is no. What am I saying then? That idols are anything? No, he's not saying that. That what's offered to idols is anything? Does that change that beef in the least? No. That pig? No. Whatever it is that was sacrificed? No. None whatsoever. All it was is, instead of this animal being killed over here at the butcher's for the sake of going to the marketplace, it is being killed over here at an altar of some idol and then sold in the marketplace. All right. Is any of that anything? He says no. Verse 20. Rather that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. And I do not want you to have fellowship with demons. Now, this is a very interesting thing. I want to just look at this for a second. When they went to the temple of Diana there in Ephesus, were they worshiping a stone image? Yes. But Paul's saying they're worshiping demons. Could it be that Satan was behind all of that? And the answer would be, of course he was. Who do you think twisted everyone's minds? Who do you think? If we go to Romans chapter 1 and see the degeneration of the Gentile world, where they had known God, they had worshiped God, and then they suppressed that truth. And what did they get? They went right into paganism, right into worshiping the creature rather than the creator. Well, what's the creature? That would be man. That would be things of this earth, such as an animal or a mix of things, as you often see in mythology, of someone that has something that has the body of a human and the head of an animal. Like the, I forgot the name of those things. It starts with the letter L. Anyway, we saw them not too long ago in one of our studies when we were studying Jonah. It's those, you have the bull body and the head of a human and a head of a man with a full beard, and then you have the wings, or you have things like that. Those things were being worshipped. Lumasu, I think, is what they're called. But those are they're these guardians of gates and whatnot. But is Satan behind this idolatry? Yes. And Paul, once again, the Holy Spirit is saying they're worshiping demons rather than God. He doesn't say they're worshiping stone or metal or clay or wood, or something else. He's saying they are worshiping demons in this. And in fact, they are. And now we continue on. You can't have fellowship with God and with demons, verse 21. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the Lord's table and the table of demons. Or do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than He? All right, so this is addressing the weaker brother, by the way. This is addressing the weaker brother of where he has incorporated Christ along with those gods and goddesses that he always had from his childhood. Okay, of Corinth, they would have, in Corinth had things imported from all over the Mediterranean world, and that would include wickedness, and that would include idolatry coming from all over the place. I have no doubt that you would have your basic Greek and Roman sort of temples there, but also in other places in the city, things that would have been imported from, let's say, Phoenicia or Egypt or Spain or some of these other places, that they would have been there as well. And you cannot incorporate Christ with all these others. You hear of some new god, you just place that one on in. It joins the rest. You hear of Christ and Jehovah, well, you just bring them right on in. And someone like Paul, just you bring him right on in, like you would some priest up here or priestess of a temple of Zeus. That they all are just go hand in hand. All of them go together in one happy group, but that's not what God is saying in this. He's saying that we cannot have fellowship with God and with demons. You can't have God in your pantheon. It is solely Him. It is just God. That's it. And that you cannot worship these other things and Him as well. You can't do it. Because some people get it in their heads. Some people, and those in Corinth weren't the only ones. We've got people today who they get in their heads that they can worship this, and then Christ is in there too. And it's like the man I'd heard of. I don't know if it's a legend, if it's true or not, but a man that had wanted to hedge all his bets, as you might say, and he was a little bit of everything. And I don't know how you can do that. I really don't, because you have a lot of... Christianity is not the only religion that presents itself as exclusive. It's not the only one. But it does need to be said, and it's being said here, that it does present itself as the exclusive way to God. And it is Jehovah only. Jehovah, that name, incorporating the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And now, or do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Or are we stronger than He? Now, we have to make mention, don't lose the notion of what He has said earlier at the end of chapter 9, verse 27. He's got to discipline himself, lest he should become disqualified. Verse 12, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. Now, he's talking about things that they should not be doing. You cannot have fellowship with God and fellowship with demons. Which means what? You can fall away by worshiping these other things. Whether you think it's a demon or the God of thunder, it hardly matters to God. You have left Him. You've left Him entirely. And God demands loyalty, and always has. From the very beginning in the Garden of Eden, all the way to this day, He expects and demands loyalty. And when He gives a command, just because you have somebody else who can convincingly give you an argument that the command is wrong, doesn't change things. The command still stands. And the one who convinced you it was wrong, just go ahead and put them down as lying. Because anyone who contradicts the words of God is presenting a lie. Whether they know it's a lie or not, they're still presenting a lie. It's a deception. Now we come to verse 23. Here is a principle that he's already been addressing in chapter 8. All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but not all things edify. Let no one seek his own, but each one the other's well-being. This is walking circumspectly. This is walking carefully. That I don't use, and we have talked about this because he wrote about it in chapter 8, that of walking in such a way as to not have you offended at something I have done to where you stumble. Something that I may rightfully be able to do under the law of Christ, but because of a weak conscience, because of weak faith, because of coming from some kind of weak background, okay, and haven't worked your way out of that, think that I have joined in with that idolatry, think that I've joined in with that thing that is wrong, and thinking that I have now justified those things, that I have, because it appears that I am observing it, because it appears that way, that I'm observant, that I am validating it. And that's not the case at all. Just like with that of the eating, the things that have been sacrificed to those idols, to eat it, as he's going to say, is meaningless. And he's already said it. Eating it doesn't make you better off or worse. Not eating it doesn't make you better off or worse. But someone with a weak conscience, seeing you partake of it, it could cause them to stumble. Therefore, let no one seek his own, but each one the other's well-being. Verse 25, look at this, eat whatever is sold in the meat market, asking no questions for conscience sake. So there are things being sold in the meat market, asking no questions. What does that mean? That means putting it into this perspective, into this context of what has been sacrificed in those idols, which was a common thing in those days. Here, I don't go to Kroger and wonder, well, was that sausage sacrificed at the temple or not? Well, no, it wasn't, unless the temple's a meat packing plant. But no, it wasn't. We don't have that problem. We don't have that problem, but we have other problems. We don't have that problem, but yeah, that's not to say that this principle doesn't come into play in many, many things in our own culture, because it does. There are things that we can do that we have every right to do it. It's not a sin to do it. But someone seeing that, having that weak conscience, someone seeing that, coming from that background, can think we're validating something we do not validate. We do not endorse. We have nothing to do with. But, okay, so ask no questions for conscience sake. So, whatever's sold in the meat market, buy it. Just don't ask any questions about it. And which probably was a common thing that occurred in the meat market. I can only assume that it was. Of someone going to, okay, so there is some goat. Looks pretty good. Was that sacrificed at the temple, or was that somewhere else? And the man behind the table would tell us. Okay, for conscience sake. Now, he's going to quote Psalm 24:1. He's going to do it twice. Now, for the earth is the Lord's and all its fullness. So, where that thing was slaughtered doesn't amount to anything. It's irrelevant to anything that's moral. It's irrelevant to the laws of God. Where the animal was slaughtered. It could have been slaughtered next to the river. It could have been slaughtered on top of the mountain in that temple. It's still God's goat. It's still His oxen. It's still His, regardless of where a man took it and killed it. It's still His. The earth is the Lord's and all its fullness. If any of those who do not believe, look at this, invites you to dinner and you desire to go, eat whatever is set before you, asking no question for conscience sake. So that they, here in whether it's in the marketplace or whether it's at somebody's house and they are hosting you, you ask no questions. This is what we're serving. You ask no questions. You ask no questions for conscience sake. And he's going to explain whose conscience in just a second. And it's not your own, it's the other person. All right, so-and-so came to the house and had a meal with us. And, that meat was sacrificed at that altar over at Athena's place. He didn't even ask about that. He wouldn't have known a thing about that. He wouldn't know where we got that, or the fish, or anything else. He would have no idea. So it would not be seen as endorsing or following or being part of anything, because you didn't know where it came from. It could have come directly off the farm. You wouldn't know where it came from. But if verse 28 again, but if anyone said, no, I'm sorry, verse 28, we just did verse 27. But if anyone says to you, this was offered to idols, do not eat it for the sake of the one who told you and for conscience sake, for the earth is the Lord's and all its fullness. Psalm 24:1 again. Conscience, I say, not your own, but that of the other. For why is my liberty judged by another man's conscience? But if I partake with thanks, why am I evil spoken of for the food over which I give thanks? Therefore, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. Give no offense either to Jew or to the Greeks or to the church of God. Okay? Then he brings this, just as I also please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of many, that they may be saved. You come in, they're offering the food to you, and they say, this was, by the way, sacrificed just this afternoon up at the temple. Don't partake of it, he says. Don't partake of it. And this is one of those things where it can be embarrassing. It's one of those things where you may offend them, but you're offending them by being obedient to God, not by flaunting a freedom that can cause them to be offended. Okay? Not because flaunting a freedom of this meat, wherever it was sacrificed, means nothing. But they think it means something, and they think you are partaking of it as part of worship to some stone idol up there. Okay? And this would come down to, no temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make a way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. You can always say no. Even when it's painful, even when there's a threat of death, and most certainly when it might be embarrassing. Most certainly then too. And we will we'll continue going into chapter 11 next week. Thank you, everybody.